was mentioned, some micronations are very young. Some micronations are quite well established. But our next speaker will take us back to the 17th century and to talk about John Locke and the foundations of microgovernment. We have the Prince of the Kingdom of Phillip. Please welcome Phillip.
Good morning, friends.
Good morning.
As I said, I'm Phillip of the Kingdom of Phillip, and it is my pleasure to share with you my presentation. So, this is the Declaration of Micronations, why micronations are legitimate, and it's rooted in social contract theory and in the ideas of John Locke. So, about this presentation. This presentation is originally based on an adaptation of university paper. This was my undergraduate philosophy capstone paper. In college I studied philosophy, and so it was time for me to come to my last class, and I had to write a philosophy research paper. And I said, well, I'm going to write about micronations. My professor at first was, what? Wait and see. So I do a lot of researching and quote-unquote philosophizing. So my goal of the paper, and so my goal of the presentation as well, is that I plan to show how irregularities in statehood criteria empower micronations, and therefore how micronations can also help to shed light on international issues, thus making a quote-unquote academic argument for micronations. States in the modern world. Since the second half of the 20th century, the number of sovereign states has increased in an unprecedented manner. Sometimes, when these new states declare independence, they are recognized as sovereign and independent states by their governments, such as South Sudan is most recent. However, sometimes the legitimacy of these states go unrecognized or disputed, such as the state of Palestine, the Republic of Kosovo, and also Taiwan, and many others are regularly disputed. Does this mean that these states are illegitimate or not independent? So, what is a state? Well, the textbook definition of a state is a body of people living in a defined territory, organized politically, that is with the government, and with the power to make and enforce laws without the consent of any higher authority. So according to this definition, an entity must have territorial land, population, sovereignty, and a government to become a state. The common international understanding of the criteria for a state to be legitimate originates from the Montevideo Convention, which we have in the back of our room, and I had the opportunity to sign yesterday, which suggests that these criteria are a permanent population, a defined territory, one unifying government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. So population, territory, government, and the ability to enter into relations with other states are the criteria that we will use for statehood is also evident of the Montevideo Convention that we see in the back of the room. And we'll advance the paper in my presentation. So there are two theories, philosophical political theories of statehood. The first is the constitutive theory, which suggests that a territory can be considered a state only if it is recognized as such by other states. There are many problems with this theory. One of the many problems with this theory is that the United Nations is highly influenced by 5 major countries. That is China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. These countries act as sort of gatekeepers of anyone who wants to join the United Nations. So if even one of them denies you, you're out of luck. That's what happens when you win World War II, I guess. The Republic of Kosovo is recognized by many states, such as the United Kingdom and the United States, but not recognized by other states, such as Russia and China. Kosovo still, more or less, is a sovereign state. So, there we go. The declarative theory of statehood. This is the second theory of statehood. which suggests that meeting all 4 requirements of the Montevideo Convention grants a territory sovereign statehood, as said earlier, because I said so. That's why it's a country, as said earlier by our MC. Many countries began on the declarative theory. With the Declaration of Independence, the United States of America declared itself independent in 1776, despite fighting a secessionist war until 1783. The year 1776 is still traditionally used as the Independence Day of the United States. Likewise, San Marino holds its Independence Day dating back to AD 301 and maintains itself as the world's oldest continuing republic. San Marino, according to legend, was founded by San Marinus, an early Christian in the Roman Empire who was fed up of persecution, went to Mount San Marino and said, "This is my country." And he lived there ever since, and since 301, even though most of the Roman Empire, since most of the Italian peninsula was maintained by the Roman Empire, he still existed within the Roman Empire. It seems that many states declare independence after reaching the criteria needed, and indeed are independent, with subsequent recognition from other states. So therefore, we will use the declarative theory. So discrepancies in criteria. Here we will be showing how many states throughout the world, many macro states, show discrepancies in population, territory, government, and ability to enter into relations with other countries, and how they deal with it, how micronations can fix those problems. So the first discrepancy in criteria is government. Even though many states have constitutions and set laws to make and enforce laws, there are some larger macronation countries out there that do not have functioning governments to protect their citizens, such as the Central African Republic, where Christian and Muslim groups have been fighting for fighting for control over the CAR for many, many years, since its conception. They do not have a functioning government. Micronations do, however, have strong functioning governments. Leaders of micronations are able to actualize their authority over their state, as few, if any, people challenge their micronational authority, generally speaking. Discrepancies in criteria. Population. The Vatican City, although it has a population of around 1,000, has a 0% population growth rate. That is, the Vatican does not really have a permanent population. When you work for the Vatican City State, you might get a citizenship, but when you're done, you go back to the citizenship of your origin. Many micronations do indeed have a population consisting of at least one person or a family living in the micronation. Many micronations have claimed citizenships living in diaspora in other countries. Nonetheless, there are claimed citizens of every micronation, or most micronations. I'm standing before about 100 of them right now, which is wonderful. My next discrepancy in the criteria is territory. Many states throughout the world have border disputes. There are actually over 150 border disputes as I'm speaking to you right now in our modern world. Some of the border disputes are more or less not so problematic. The gray zone, quote unquote, between the United States and Canada is a body of water and an island that both countries claim ownership of, but doesn't affect very many people, except for maybe a little bit of fishing industry. However, according to National Geographic, 6 of the most controversial land disputes that affect the lives of millions of people throughout the world are Crimea, East China Sea, Jammu and Kashmir, Golan Heights, Gaza Strip and West Bank, Western Sahara, and Transnistria. These border disputes affect the lives of many millions of people and show that many macro governments don't have the defined territories they say they do. So these border disputes prove that most states don't have the quote-unquote defined territory. Many micronations do in fact have defined territory. Have liberal land, for example, even though they have border disputes, they do have a claimed territory and land between their 2 macro nations. The next discrepancy in criteria is entering into relations with other states. North Korea may be considered somewhat of a lone state, even though there's been some diplomatic relations in the past couple months, which kind of threw a wrench into my presentation. For better or for worse. When I wrote this paper back in the beginning in February, this wasn't the case. China may be considered somewhat of an ally of North Korea, despite being wary of some of North Korea's previous actions. North Korea has had sanctions against them from the United Nations and the United States. But micronations do, in fact, despite many countries not being able to get along, micronations are able to get along and enter into diplomatic relations with each other and with their macronations surrounding them. MicroCon is a great example of diplomacy and how we're able to exchange free ideas and friendships, as I'm standing here before you. From my understanding, the president of Malaysia received a Christmas card from President Obama. Is that correct?
That was very nice.
Wonderful act of diplomacy, am I right?
We got several from us too. So.
And from my understanding, Kalsahara and Malaysia have engaged in diplomatic visits throughout the past. And then the Kingdom of Phillip has received some contact from the Grand Duchy of West Arctica, which we have been very honored to communicate with. And I know that there are so many more examples, but these are the ones I was able to research through my university's library, so I know there are so many others, which is awesome. The next thing is the idea of de jure and de facto sovereignty, which I know many of us are familiar with. De jure sovereignty is, quote, the sovereign right and status is attributed to states according to international law, end quote. So essentially, de jure sovereignty is who has the legal right to the power over a state. This is many times not effective, as many states such as Somalia and the Central African Republic, even though they have de jure sovereignty and de jure rule, they don't do very good at actualizing that. They can't enforce their rules very well. De facto sovereignty is what happens as a matter of fact, despite what the law suggests. So this form of sovereignty is who really actualizes and exercises authority over their state. So my argument is, if no one tries to legitimately challenge or stop a micronationalist from exercising his or her authority over his or her micronation, then he or she is at least de facto sovereign, even if de jure law ignores it. So, yeah, the United States might ignore the Kingdom of Phillip, but I still hold control over my country because they haven't shown up my door yet asking me to stop. So as promised, John Locke in the Foundations of Government. John Locke is a renowned and famous political and social science philosopher. His ideas go into forming the social contract theory that many countries use. And he suggests, and I quote, "Men are naturally free, and the examples of history shewing that governments of the world that were begun in peace had their beginning laid on the foundation and were made by the consent of the people." So this is the people freely choose to consent to come into society. We don't have to, but we choose to do so for the mutual benefit of all. Whether it's a micronation or a macronation, we all come together for our benefit. We are here for our benefit. So he continues to suggest that if anybody can shew me any one man in any age of the world free to begin a lawful monarchy, I will be bound to show him 10 other free men at liberty at the same time to unite and begin a new government under regal or any other form. I'm standing before about 100 of them today.
Amen.
So according to John Locke, we are essentially able to and freely enter into, participate in, and lead and form our own societies, according to his theory in old international law and those ideas. So applying this to micronations. Not only have many micronations met the criteria needed to be considered legitimate states, they shed light on problems and irregularities of other states, macro states throughout the world. By bringing awareness to political affairs, micronations also serve as examples of the human strive for freedom, peace, and justice. Allowing for the existence of micronations is also allowing for the basis of fundamental human rights. Micronations are not only legitimate states and sovereign entities, they embody the ideas of the human rights for independence and the desire for self-determination. This is why micronations are necessary. Micronations also work together to create better conditions for the rest of the world through collaborations and conventions such as MicroCon. And working together for a better world, micronations are examples of how states ought to work together for the common good of all people. And working for the common good of all all people of the one human family may be ultimately raised up to the fullness of freedom, peace, and justice in every state of our world. Thank you. And got all my sources because this was an academic paper.